Good morning. Welcome to Drive Time with Mr. Otway, who's on his way to work, and I thought that you would benefit from a bit of an explanation to help you write your answer about the Renaissance today, and also about the Reformation afterwards. So imagine you're watching an episode of Top Gear, if you've ever seen that. That's what's about to happen. Now, as we talked about last lesson, or if you weren't here, the Renaissance, it means rebirth, being born again. And when somebody says you've been born again, it's almost like you've changed so much that you've got an entirely new perspective on life itself. And that is what people say happened to the world in the 15th century, the 1400s. And when we're thinking about why did it happen, well, the Renaissance is known, or is kind of agreed upon, it started in Italy. And the reason why it started in Italy is because Italy at the time, in the 15th century, became very, very wealthy. Partly because of the location of where it was. There was a lot of trade going between Africa and other parts of the Mediterranean, the sea, and Italy. So Italy and some families in Italy got really, really rich, and the most famous family, wealthy Italian family of the early modern period of the Renaissance was the Medici family, but it wasn't the only one. And because they were so fabulously wealthy, they had money to spare. So they spent some of their money on employing artists and sculptors, and not just that, but also astronomers and people designing and coming up with theories, writing books, people like Leonardo da Vinci. Now, because they were paying for these things, we call them patrons. They were patrons of the arts. And also, at the time in the Renaissance, very, very important, there was the invention of the printing press. So when these people had some ideas, it meant their ideas could spread more quickly because of the printing press. And it means that people started to look for explanations for things in life, for some of the more complex questions. They started to look for explanations in places other than religion and God, and what God wants and what God decided. Which means the world started to discover things that had otherwise been left undiscovered previously to this. And they weren't I'm sure that these people like Galileo, Michelangelo, Leonardo, painting these things, coming up with these ideas, I'm sure they're not the first. The difference was, with the people of the Renaissance, is that the printing press meant that their ideas could spread quicker because you could make lots and lots of books very quickly and far more cheaply than you could before, when they had to be copied down. So the printing press had a massive impact. And when we're thinking about crime and punishment, this meant ideas about punishments, about criminals and crimes, they could spread quicker. But it actually had a negative effect in many ways to begin with in England, because it spread fear of certain crimes and certain criminals that blew things way out of proportion. One of the reasons why there was a big witch craze, where people were terrified of witches and trying to hunt them down, was because of the printing press spreading stories about the evil deeds of witches. And one of the reasons why people were so worried and angry about vagabonds who were simply moving from one place to another, usually to find work, was because of all the stories that they were reading or hearing, more likely, from other people about vagabonds and what they'd been up to and what problems they'd been causing around the country. So the poor old vagabonds suffered because of the printing press, and the printing press came about because of the Renaissance, and so many poor women and some men suffered terribly being accused of witches because of the rumours and the fears being spread because of the printing press. Now, the Renaissance links very closely to the Reformation. Now, if you so you got rebirth, being born anew, suddenly going, oh, that's what this could be all about. The Reformation. Reform means to change something, to remake it, reform it. And in the 1500s, so the 16th century, right at the start, there was a man known as Martin Luther. Now, you've probably heard of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is named after Martin Luther, who was absolutely crucial in history. Again, he wasn't the first person to do what he did. There were many people before that who'd questioned the church, and that's what Martin Luther did. He questioned the church. Up until Martin Luther and the Reformation, there was only one church, and everybody believed that church. Everybody listened to the Pope, and that made it super, super powerful. But along came Martin Luther, who started to question things about the church. He thought, why are we doing things that way? That doesn't seem very fair. And one of the things he looked at was injustice, unfairness, effectively. Because there were lots and lots of very poor people in the world, but the church was very, very rich. Now, if you know anything about Bible stories and about Jesus, he did not go around like the King of Bling, flashing his cash around. He went round helping the needy, helping the poor, according to the Bible. He had no possessions that I can think of. If you see him depicted in films, he's always wearing rags, trying to feed people, trying to help the sick, and so on and so forth. Not with all the wealth that the church had, and the church was mightily, mightily wealthy. And Martin Luther looked at that and thought, why is that happening? Surely we should be giving away this wealth, not trying to take more of it, and we should be trying to help the poor, not make them poorer. One of the things that he really took an issue with was something called indulgences, because the Catholic Church at the time was telling people that if you pay the Catholic Church a sum of money, they will give you a piece of paper called an indulgence, which says when you die you get to go to heaven, which is absolutely ludicrous. And it really annoyed Martin Luther, because at one point the Pope sent some people to Saxony, which is in what we call Germany now, which is where Martin Luther lived. He sent one of his people, the Pope, to Saxony to try to sell indulgences. Basically to sell worthless bits of paper, but that said on it, you get to go to heaven for buying this, thank you very much. And the reason the Pope did this was because he was struggling to pay for this wonderful new building in Rome, which Martin Luther was absolutely livid about. So he wrote a set of complaints. He protested about indulgences, about unfairness in the church. And his protest was called the 95 Theses, because he had 95 things he was cross about. He supposedly nailed it to the doors of a church in that part of Germany where he lived. And like I say, he wasn't the first to complain about the church and the injustice and say, this isn't fair, the church is being run poorly. But his views were heard on a wide scale because of the printing press. He also believed that the Bible should be translated into people's own language. So before it was only ever in Latin, and the priests could read Latin, but the rest of the people couldn't. So they had to trust the priest who would tell them what the Bible said. Well, Martin Luther said that's wrong. The priests are ordinary people just like everybody else. Everybody else should be allowed to read the Bible. So he started to translate it first into German, because he was a German, but then afterwards it was translated into loads of other languages. And what he was doing was protesting. The word spread because of the printing press. His ideas took hold, and people started to go, yeah, we should be able to read the Bible. And yeah, those indulgences, what a load of rubbish. How ridiculous is that the church is so rich? And he became the first ever Protestant, or as we call them, Protestant. And lots of people copied his ideas. Now, in terms of the impact on crime and punishment, well, it caused a lot of heartache and lots of problems, lots of wars and lots of conflict and lots of fear. And there's thoughts that all of the fear and suspicion and hatred and all the bad things that happened from the Catholics and the Protestants fighting each other led also contributed to the witch craze, because people thought, how is this happening in the world? And also fearing about whether they're going to heaven or to hell, which led them to believe more easily in things like witches and the evil and the devil being there and all that sort of stuff. But also, it destroyed the power of the church, because when it was just one huge organisation, it controlled so much, like law and order, crime and punishment. As soon as you get different versions of the church, that one organisation is no more. It becomes lots of different organisations, which is exactly what happened. There was the Protestants and the Catholics, but the Protestants split into lots of different versions of Protestants with their own types of churches, like the Church of England. So this is the point. The Reformation is the point at which the church begins to lose its grip over law and order. Don't make the mistake of thinking people weren't religious anymore. They definitely were incredibly religious. But the Renaissance, which in itself led to, or was very closely linked to, the Reformation, both of those things destroy the power of the church as a single organisation. People start to look for other answers, and the church is not powerful enough to invade everybody's lives as one organisation. So the power of the church and the hold of the church over law and order doesn't immediately go in the early modern period, but it starts to fade away. Hope that's useful. I'm going to listen to the radio. See you later.